It is hard. It is going to be the hardest thing. You get a prenatal diagnosis, there's a lot of unknowns. You don't know. But insofar as you do know, you can anticipate this is going to be the hardest thing that you've ever done. It's going to be unimaginably difficult. It's going to be isolating. No one else knows. It's scary.
Yeah.
And you should say yes.
You're listening to Season 2 of the CPC Metro Podcast, brought to you by the faithful generosity of life champions and the courage of those willing to speak up. What's up, everybody, and welcome back to the CPC Metro Podcast. My name is Chrissy. The Center for Pregnancy Choices is the largest pregnancy resource center in the state of Mississippi, and we exist to empower the choice for life. We are really excited about this show today, and there's a few different ways that I can intro it. One thing is that we have our first return guest, so I'm very excited to have her back. But also, I could say that we have a former CPC employee and a current CPC employee with us. We've never had a married couple on the show before, so I'm struggling how to get this right, but since Aaron Kate is not here to do the introductions, I guess it just falls on me to introduce you guys to Nate and Anja Baker. They have been monumental in the pro-life movement for a long time. I think she's been active in the fight since she was in high school, okay? I don't know very much about Nate before probably 6 months ago, so I'll have to ask you a little bit about that. But these people are some of my favorite people in the world, and I'm so happy to have them here with me today and discuss building a culture of life. The reason that we decided to do this particular show today is because of a specific story that broke earlier in the summer. I can't remember if I was the one that texted Anja or if she texted me first, but there is a conversation to be had about abortion and eugenics and special needs. And these guys are the ones to talk to. I can think of no better people to weigh in on the discussion. And we hope that this will help you when these kinds of topics come up, when stories break and they are not just in the pro-life world, but they're starting national conversations that wouldn't have any attention on them otherwise. So, Anja, welcome back.
Thank you.
It's so good to have you back.
Yeah, honored to be the first returning guest. I didn't realize that.
Well, you also had something very big happen to you from the time that you were here last time and now. And so tell everybody what that is.
A fourth baby?
A fourth baby.
Okay, I was guessing. I'm right.
Yes, you're
that
right.
Was the thing.
So how old is she?
She's 5 months old.
Okay.
Bernadette. We call her Birdie.
I love it.
First girl, 3 big brothers.
That's right. You were in the same club as me up until a very short time ago. So as much as it hurts to see you graduate on, I'm super happy for you. And
Thank
so do you want to introduce your husband?
Okay, I will. This is my husband, Nate Baker. He is now in the community relations department, the fundraising development department at CPC, where I used to work. And I still sometimes feel like an honorary team member.
Yeah.
But Nate has spent his career in events and fundraising and for different causes and has been alongside me as I've done pro-life stuff. And so he has heard me talk about it endlessly. And so when Aaron Kate was in need of certain position filled, I thought, Nate has all the context. He does events and fundraising. It makes sense. And so here we are now. Me and Nate have been married almost 9 years. We've been together since we were 15.
Mm-hmm.
And we're 31 now, so over half our life.
Yes. And we have 4 kids, and we have an oldest who's about to be 8. Herschel, who we'll talk about probably the most today, is 5, and he has special needs. And Fulton is almost 3, and Birdie is 5 months.
They're all 30 months apart, almost exactly.
Yes.
Crazy.
And so it is, and I'm an only child. So I've gone from a quiet upbringing to a very chaotic
to
one.
lots of chaos.
boys. Yep.
Yes. Well, Nate, welcome to the show.
I'm glad to be here.
It's good to have you. You know,
Yeah.
I didn't have Nate on the docket. Like, I knew we were doing this show because for those who don't know, I do host this podcast, but I also produce it. And so I'm in charge of coming up with a lot of the content. And so your name was on my list for topics to discuss because I wanted to talk about the pro-life stance in special needs. So I knew that I was going to have you come in and talk, but I didn't know that, Nate, since he started at CPC, we have talked about, theology and history and business and all the things. And I just think he is so insightful and brilliant. So, as a dad, I think your voice is also important. So I really appreciate you, saying yes
I'm
to
excited.
me coming in and tapping you on the shoulder and saying, hey, would you mind being on with Anja?
Yeah, it's interesting.
Yeah.
Interesting dynamic.
Yeah. Well, let's just kind of get started and talk about what the issue was that caused me to say, you know what, we need to go ahead and push this talk out a little bit earlier than I had planned. And I want to be clear at the very forefront, we're not here to throw stones. This was a very sad situation, and it broke our hearts that it even happened. But what we hope comes from this is that the people who support us and who listen to this podcast know a little bit better about how to have conversations about when things like this happen, right? We know that people who listen to us, that we don't need to beat a dead horse. Like, everybody agrees on our abortion stance, right? But they may not know the best way to approach, topics about special needs. So, Anja, if you could just tell a little bit about Hershey's story.
Yeah. So our second born, we had him when we were in our mid-20s and had a totally healthy, typical pregnancy. And unfortunately, he sustained a severe brain injury at his birth when he was born.
Mm-hmm.
So it's not the classic prenatal diagnosis story. It's that surprise right at delivery. And it took a while to kind of figure out what was going on with him. And the way brain injuries work is many other diagnoses follow that. So it's not one diagnosis, and really it rarely is when it comes to any disability. So he has that type of brain injury that he endured is called HIE, hypoxic ischemic encephalopathy.
Mm-hmm.
If you ever see HIE, that's what it stands for. Big words. But he also has cerebral palsy as a result.
Okay.
He is in a wheelchair. He can't sit or roll himself. He's nonverbal. He uses a G-tube, a feeding tube. He can eat a little bit by mouth, but not enough to sustain himself.
Right.
He has cortical vision impairment, meaning he can see, but it neurologically has a difficulty processing his vision.
Low muscle tone.
Low muscle tone.
GI problems.
Epilepsy. So he has seizures. Usually they're controlled, but lately they have not been because he's had a surgery.
Mm-hmm.
He has dysphagia, meaning he has struggles with swallowing. It can be a risk for aspiration. He recently had a double hip surgery because not using your bones impacts your skeletal system. He even has caps on his teeth because his medication has affected his teeth as they've come in and softened them. So he's had to have them capped. So pretty much every bodily system, I'm sure I'm even leaving out.
It's a cascade of effects that continue to develop throughout his life. So,
yes.
And a lot of complications in his care. I mean, he requires 24/7 care for the rest of his life. And like Anja said, we went into the hospital in March of 2021, excited to welcome our second child. And we left the hospital with our lives totally turned upside down and not really knowing what that was going to look like because there were so many unknowns. And like Anja says all the time, the experience was just a series of no's. You have some hope. Well, maybe this will be, it could go one way or the other, and you're consistently find out it's going in the not good direction. So for years, you're kind of learning that, your son's never going to walk. He's never going to talk. And it's going to be very difficult to care for him. And that affects the entire timeline of the rest of your life. So you have to account for what your life's going to look like. So there's a lot of grieving that comes with that. It affects his siblings as well. Locke is his older brother. He remembers that. It's going to affect his entire life and all of his other younger siblings, his 2 younger siblings as well. So it affects the whole family and everything in ways that you can't anticipate.
Right.
So that is a difficult process. And for the first 3 years of his life, we were 25 when he was born, or I was still 25. He didn't really sleep. He has what's called neurofussiness. It's an effect of his neurological condition. So that means that he would not sleep through the night at all. So if you can imagine a colicky baby, but like times 100 and a lot longer with no end in sight.
Mm-hmm.
So he would be inconsolable throughout the day and the night with intermittent some rest.
Mm-hmm.
And the only way I could get him to sleep was on a recliner. So I would sleep on a recliner for 3 years because that was the only way that maybe I could get him to sleep a little bit.
Yeah.
So that, we've got chronic sleep deprivation, and we just assume this is how it's going to be forever.
Yeah.
And eventually, after years, we got his seizures under control, better managed with medications, and he did start sleeping. But just to lay some of the context for our experience and kind of what life looks like now, it's totally different than what we thought. And I guess that kind of leads into the discussion about life and, how do we approach this? Because a lot of people, when they get a diagnosis, there's this idea that, well, if we can avoid that, it's not worth them living that difficulty. And, from my perspective, living with my son and a lot of the pain that comes with it, not just how it affects us, but we're having to watch our son suffer. We're having to watch our son in seizures, and he's got his hips, cut open and his bone shaved down to reseat his entire hips. And there's a lot of pain after that. That's my son. I love my son as much as I love my other children. And so the idea that you get a diagnosis and you decide to terminate their life is unthinkable to me. So there's a lot of topics within that we can get into about.
Well, you're right. Just to kind of lay the foundation, I kind of wanted everybody to know that on the front end, because when we talk about the Jesse Ridgway situation, which very briefly that kind of started this discussion, was that he is a famous YouTuber, TikTok. I had never really heard of him before earlier in the summer, but he and his wife decided to have an abortion after a diagnosis of Down syndrome. I think she was maybe like 20 weeks or something like that. And they were met, it's controversial because they were met with a lot of people supported them in their decision. And they were like, oh, that was so hard. You're so brave for making the decision that you did. We all feel bad for you. We grieve with you. And then the pro-life community and the special needs community, there was a lot of backlash there. And so what really got to me was that they wanted to paint the abortion as a mercy. So I am doing my child a favor by not allowing him life, because it was a boy. They did know that. And going through with the abortion to save him a life of medical complications. Right?
Right.
So what is your thought on the whole abortion as mercy? Because you live,
Yes.
Hershey's diagnoses is that's a severe special needs case.
Yes.
Right?
And
it's not Down syndrome is what I'm saying.
Right. He is in the minority by having a diagnosis that occurred, an event that occurred post-birth.
Right.
Majority of his peers at his school and his medical settings, at his therapy clinics, at his doctors, this is something genetic or chromosomal, inherited or mutated. I won't get into genetics, but
sure,
that they either, whether they knew during pregnancy or not, this is the way this child was formed and was made.
Mm-hmm.
So even though that's not our particular scenario of getting that prenatal diagnosis, all of my son's friends, maybe 100%, 99%, the situation was this is how this child was crafted in their mother's womb.
That's right.
And that is their story. And so obviously very sensitive to it. I did see a lot of special needs, disability parent backlash locally from people I know. But the disability community at large, all the accounts I follow for tips, tricks, and hacks, medical advice, they really struggled with it because it didn't feel good and it felt really icky because they didn't want to say my own child shouldn't be alive. But they also were like, let me be clear. I'm pro-choice. Let me be clear. I'm pro-choice. People should be able to do this. However, it was just the way they framed it. It was just the way they said it. And my opinion on that is that these are people who don't know how abortions occur.
Right.
Because you don't believe that it's a mercy killing or a mercy medical event. However you want to use mental gymnastics to flavor the language, if you know what had to happen to that child.
Right. They don't just, disintegrate into dust like Thanos or something.
Yes.
Like there is, and especially the further along the pregnancy gets, I think the more graphic that it gets.
Yes. So I think that that's probably where people are coming from who haven't looked into what actually needed to occur and think, oh, all the things that me and Nate just listed that some of his peers deal with, feeding tube, seizures, lack of mobility, nonverbal, they think, oh, that's so horrible. It would be more merciful to just spare them of that. And like you said,
spare them. That's the thing. That's the key that everybody I think is really wanting to believe that you're sparing a child or you're sparing the family.
But would they murder their child now so that they can spare them from the rest of their life? No.
Right.
Right, because there's a lot of diagnoses. Autism diagnosis is typically not till a child's older, preschool age or older.
Right. And there is an argument to be made that there will be suffering in that.
Yeah. By what standard would you say, okay, well, I have a Down syndrome child. I carried to term. I knew that. Now life's really difficult. And maybe I should just save him from the rest of his life by killing. They would never say that. They don't think about that. And I think I've heard a lot of the special needs community, they will say things like, and I understand where they're coming from, but they're trying to say, well, I love my child, but I would not wish this on anyone else. So therefore, I understand why they did it. Well, I wouldn't wish my situation on any of my friends either, but you don't get to kill your child.
Right.
And God doesn't make mistakes. Like he crafted these children with that.
Right.
And it's not our choice to say, well, I prefer to have this, what I conceive of as a normal life and all of these particular ideas of how I thought my life would go and what it would look like and what my children's life would look like. And so I'm going to take that into my own hands to avoid this suffering. The purpose of life is not to avoid suffering. I think a lot of us today in the West especially have been conditioned to believe that life is about our desires and what we want to do, and we think we can have control over our lives, and you don't. And when you have a child like Herschel, you're reminded of that very directly and every single day. And, something I say, it gets controversial within the special needs parent community, but having a disabled child is a burden. Having any normal child is a burden. Like, it's a burden. And, I say normal. I know there's a lot of controversial around, normal versus typical.
Yeah.
They mean the same thing, okay?
Yeah.
Herschel's life is not normal.
Right.
That's why it sucks.
Right.
That's the whole thing. And we have to accept that,
Yeah.
Herschel is not living a normal life. It's very hard. It's very hard for him. He has a lot of suffering. He also has a lot of joy. We have a lot of suffering. We also have a lot of joy. And you're going to have some degree of that with totally healthy, typical children.
Right.
And I think people need to just embrace that. And, a lot of this comes from really being grounded in the Christian perspective, the Christian understanding of life and the purpose of life. I think that's where a lot of this comes down to is if you have a secular worldview, a secular paradigm, well, all that really exists is my comfort and my pleasure and my desires. And so if I can do anything and I can rationalize some way for me to preserve that, well, then I'm going to do that. So a lot of it comes back to those fundamentals.
Well, and we do view children as kind of just pick and choose, almost like designer baby type situations, which are a completely different topic. But I think people people really feel like if my kid can't play travel ball, if
Mhm.
my kid isn't going to be academically straight A's, something as something like dyslexia, like, wait, they're going to struggle in school? This
Right.
isn't what I signed up for,
Right.
Mhm.
I don't mean to just make fun of that situation, but I think in general, anything that deviates from the idea I have in my head about how my family's supposed to look is really tough for modern day.
It
I was
is.
gonna say Americans, but I think just like
It's global.
modern
Yeah.
day, and really one realization I had to come to early in Herschel's life was you can have a healthy child and they can have a drowning accident
Mhm.
and sustain a brain injury. I started to be
Right.
exposed to families like that who are kind of in our bucket of brain injuries, but it wasn't a birth event. It was a
Right.
drowning accident or a suffocation event
Yeah.
or, yeah, autism diagnosis comes later or some virus that ends up affecting a child for their life. And so it kind
Or
of burst this bubble of a healthy child is a healthy child and this is like what we deserve.
yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, it can happen in a car accident or any number of
Well,
traumatic things can happen. Yeah.
we are not in control.
No.
And so even though you had a healthy pregnancy and this was not what you were expecting, God had it in his hands first, you know?
Right.
And so that's part of the story that that you guys are living is there is a life of suffering, but you have not let it shake your faith in God. I think that one of the most pressing questions that I feel like everybody is wanting to know is that when that happened to you, did it impact or change your faith or your you know the pro-life stance that you had been living for years at that point?
Well, really, in my situation, I felt like it was all I had. I
Mhm.
had to lean on
Mhm.
my faith because, for example, the divorce rates for
Mhm.
special needs parents, depending on what study you're looking at or what survey you're looking at, it's over 80%. It
Mm.
can be geographically, depending what you're looking at, over 90% when you're talking about severe disability.
Right.
So,
Within the first year, those
yes.
marriages fall apart very quickly
So
oftentimes.
you don't have enough. You're both processing.
That's
So
right.
you don't have enough to fully depend on the other's emotion or state of mind that day.
Mhm.
So it can't be just 100% I'm going to lean into my marriage. It can't be your parents because your parents have not experienced this. So they can help how they can help, but they're not going to say, "Well, I remember when this happened to me, son." No.
No.
And usually it's like no one you know.
Right.
You might be lucky to find an online support group or a peer mentor of some kind through different specialty programs, but every situation is different. The person who's in the first days of their journey isn't ready to look at a 5-year-old or a 10-year-old and jump
Yeah.
to that's what my life's going to be like because brains are confusing things and
That's right.
we don't know. So you don't want to project too much what their life's going to look like in the future.
Mhm.
You can't depend on the support groups or even your marriage or even necessarily your friends from church or
Mhm.
you can get support and the body of Christ can come around you, but really I had to depend on my relationship with the Lord.
Mm.
And I'm so grateful for that because I've thought so many times, where would I be if I didn't even have a frame of reference for that when all of this happened? I'm
Right.
so
And we've
thankful.
observed other parents who don't. And it fills me with a tremendous gratitude that I have that because I'm able to approach life with some of that peace despite all the difficulty and understanding, really the purpose of life is not, I'm not mourning as many things as I think a lot of our peers do because there's just a lot of temptation to despair.
Mm.
When you are sleep deprived, and you are not functioning and you have seen no end in sight. And it's this a constant burden of having to stay on top of it and care give and also maintain your relationship with your wife. And you have children. I want to be present for my other children. I don't want them to feel neglected in their childhood because we have to deal with this.
Right.
I think that it's a difficult thing, but if you don't have that relationship, you have that temptation to despair, and I think it's much easier to fall into that. So it's essential. It really grew my relationship because it forced me to confront things that, who knows? I mean, this happened when we were 25, but I have no idea how I would be today at age 31 had I not had this experience. And I'm grateful for the experience in so many ways because it's sort of like a portal. You walk through this portal and your life's totally different. You never would have chosen it, but here you are. And you now see things that you never saw before. And you start to realize that, that my whole life there have been special need parents. I went to school with some. We all remember some kids in the special needs class and everything. You're aware that it exists, but it's a whole world out there. And then when you're in that boat, suddenly I'm the parent at the school and I'm meeting the other parents and this is my life now. If you were to, probably when Anja and I started dating, we were in high school, it would have probably been one of my top 5 fears.
Definitely.
Like,
it would have been one of your
one of my top 5 fears.
Because we talked about it while dating.
And I was like, man, that's just a nightmare. Well, here we go. So that is God teaching you things in these difficult ways that, you kind of go kicking and screaming through it, but here you are, and it forces you to grow spiritually. So that's a perspective.
Well, it reminds me of James 1, count it all joy when you face trials of many kinds, because that is the testing of your faith,
Yeah.
And that's what I see from you guys. Like, you guys y'all don't walk around with a rain cloud over you. You do not despair. Like, I see joy just radiate with your family. And I don't know if you told Anja this. I hope you did. But we had a CPC retreat not too long ago, and Chandra Jarrett was the speaker. She was on this podcast several months ago. And she called Nate out when she was preaching. Like, she was just on a roll. And she said, you know what? I don't know any couple that loves their children like Nate and Anja love their children.
Well, I'm glad this is recorded so we can show our kids when they're older. Because it doesn't always feel like that.
No.
It very much humans have limits, and I will often feel like, oh my gosh, I'm not doing enough for my oldest. Well, now my youngest is behind on this. And this summer we've been totally locked in the house for this hip recovery. And I'm like, my kid needs to get on a bike. He's using training wheels. He's getting too old for it. But how am I going to teach him? I feel that I lack. And I thankfully we have a wonderful community. Yes. And maybe the reason you see joy on me is because I got a couple of group chats that I blow up and they listen to me. And I'm like, sorry, I'm so negative. I'm always so negative. But they hear me out and hold that space for me. Am I supposed to say that?
That's a thing now.
But I know I generally get what it means. Sometimes I need to be like uber negative, and that
you got to vent sometimes.
It's
a very isolating experience, especially early on. Like, it's much better now than it used to be. But when it's brand new, you have a lot of people that want to help you, but they don't know how to help you. They have no experience with it. And, they get to go home after they do their help. And this is my home. It never stops for me, and people will get like frustrated with you because they themselves are stressed out about it and they don't know how to process it. But it gives you, I remember I did have a breakfast with an older parent who had a disabled child right after Herschel was born. I was connected through a friend, and we had breakfast. And I'm really grateful for that conversation because he was the only guy that just told me stuff like, it's going to get worse, by the way.
Yeah.
And it's going to get worse before it gets better, but it will get better. And he said, your parents aren't going to get it. All the people you are used to relying on are not going to get it. They're never going to get it. And it's actually kind of silly for you to expect for them to get it, because the only reason you get it is because it's your life. It's not their life. So it is isolating. And I highly, highly recommend if you get a prenatal diagnosis or a situation like Herschel, my inbox is always open, but find somebody who's a few chapters ahead of you on it, because that is such a big deal, because it is a very isolating time. And I think that's one of the biggest difficulties. And like Anja said, that's when you have to lean on the Lord, because you can't lean on anybody else.
Right.
Well, something as simple as just some general parent advice, classically good parent advice, 10,000 hours outside. Like,
Right.
having this problem, go outside, turn off your screens, go outside, go on a hike, and I'm like, my son's plugged into the wall. I can't even give that to my other kids. And so even though there's nothing wrong about that, the enemy will use that to highlight how being a special needs parent or disability parent is different.
Right.
And I've noticed that from other parents that speak up on it, even locally, is this small thing is like the last straw for me. And then I'm like feeling alone. But there were a couple of things about the timing of Herschel's birth that in the broader pro-life movement were really timely. And I don't know if you and Nate have talked about that before.
No, please. Educate us.
So 2 things. One, in the legislative session for Mississippi in 2020, the crazy one where COVID happened right in the middle.
Yeah.
Somehow the pro-life community rallied together and we got a law passed to ban abortions in Mississippi based on disability, sex, and race. And it was kind of a weird battle, especially when there was a lot of noise around other topics and COVID happened in the middle. And so I was talking to the disabled community, and I was bringing testimonies of families that had life-limiting diagnoses, complexities. And then a year later, it was me.
Wow.
So that was one thing that was just, I don't know, providential for me to spend all that time on that topic a year before my own journey would begin. And then the other thing is that when Herschel was, I don't know, a couple months old. A couple months old, I got an alert on my phone, Mississippi chosen for Supreme Court challenge of Roe v. Wade Dobbs decision.
And the rest is history.
And I was like, this is a really bad time for me. Like, this
Not
is not
ideal.
Yeah.
Because
and you were actively involved. And
Right.
as a result, our whole family was involved.
I said no at first, though.
You did.
I said, there's no way I can do this. I've never been least capable. I've never been on less sleep. I am half of a person right now. I don't know what the future holds. I'm at the children's hospital every week. There's no way. There's no way. And I was being called into stepping into a larger role. That is when I left CPC, but it was to work on resources for the upcoming Dobbs decision. And then the Attorney General asked if I would come speak outside the oral arguments rally outside the Supreme Court. And I was like, I can't travel with him. There's no way I can go. There's no way I can speak. I'll get stuck in the crowd. How will I do this? How will I do that? And then we ended up saying yes. And Herschel came with us to the Supreme Court. And I had all of these interviews to do, again, running on no sleep. That's how you know God is real. That's how you know God is real, because I didn't bomb any of these oppositional media interviews.
Right.
New York Times or NPR, some of these bigger names. I just had no time to prepare. I was on no sleep. I barely had a note card in front of me, and I was going to be up against maybe like an abortionist. And God knew what needed to be said. He just needed me to move my mouth, basically. Yeah. And I was a 26-year-old mom with a disabled newborn, severe outcomes going on. And so I was able to speak, even though that was how I felt before I had him, I was able to speak from a place of knowing, to say, I'm not saying I'm asking you to do something easy by parenting or choosing adoption, by continuing this pregnancy. But I'm also not talking from a place of complete ignorance when I'm speaking to it. And I think Herschel, like you said, God knew that this was going to happen. And I do think that his impact on people, the largest impact Herschel's had, like nationwide, maybe worldwide, so far in his 5 years of life, has been disarming people about the future, that a happy life is possible in these kinds of scenarios. And the best compliment I've ever had in my entire life was a young woman who said to me, just off the cuff, hey, I appreciate how you share about Herschel. You know, it makes me not so afraid if this were to happen to me. And it like reverberated in my brain.
Yeah.
That'll get you through some time.
Yes.
For sure.
But see, that is what we are talking about when we say, I mean, this is kind of like the new campaign at CPC. We are building a culture of life. That is what that looks like, to build a culture of life, because the culture up to this point has said, be afraid. This is overwhelming. This is hard. You're going to suffer. You're going to struggle. You can't handle it. You just need to fix it.
No, it is hard. It is going to be the hardest thing. You get a prenatal diagnosis, there's a lot of unknowns. You don't know. But insofar as you do know, you can anticipate this is going to be the hardest thing that you've ever done. It's going to be unimaginably difficult. It's going to be isolating. No one else knows. It's scary.
Yeah.
And you should say yes.
Mm.
And by
Just
the
simple.
way, having a lifetime of care is hard, but a lot of times people get a diagnosis that child is not going to live past birth, or that child most likely is going to have hours or days, or maybe a couple years. That doesn't change our perspective on it being worth it.
Right.
And there are a lot of resources for preparing for that scenario that we very much are always referring to.
About people don't know about that. Yeah. You the reality is, when these things happen, you're being called to that life. And that extends to you. You could get a diagnosis. You get cancer. You could have all sorts of horrific things happen to you. That's part of it. Again, we're not promised an easy life. I think that's the big thing. And there's a unique type of joy and grace that you receive when you carry these burdens and you embrace those burdens and you accept them for what they are. It forces an acceptance instead of trying to control, because you can't. You can't. You're here and I can't. This is outside of my control.
Yeah.
This is, he's screaming in the night and there's nothing I can do. And I just have to sit in that and do what I can. And you have to, in those moments, accept that. It forces you to stay oriented in the right way and not deceive yourself into thinking that life is about anything else.
That's right. And I think going back to the Jesse Ridgway situation, Erin, Kate, and I talked at length about that, because I remember I was so fired up earlier this summer. I drafted a whole email that I did not send, just pouring out my stream of consciousness about how angry it made me, because everything was happy, everything was fun and games until it wasn't, right? They were excited about the pregnancy. They had the party, the documentation, they're vloggers or whatever. So I was just really mad at them for doing that. And I said, this is eugenics. If you find out that your child has blank, just fill in whatever that blank may be, and you choose to abort your baby for that reason, that is eugenics, right?
Yes.
But Erin Kate said, you have to remember, we cannot expect people who do not follow Christ to act in a way that as though they do, right? And so these people do not know the Lord. And so to me, there is a very stark contrast in the way that the Bakers have responded to that situation and lost people. And so when we talk about building a culture of life, sometimes it's just what you just said, that lady said to you, just planting a seed. Maybe the way that I've been told is not the only way. Maybe it is possible for me to embrace the trial. And maybe that is a seed that will be planted, or a path that will eventually lead them to the Lord.
Yes, 100%. I mean, even in my experience, my faith was formed in a new way throughout all of this experience. But God's law is written on your heart. He's written on everybody's heart.
Absolutely.
Everybody knows. They are convincing themselves, and the culture is responding, saying, "Yeah, you can't do that. That's hard. We can't do hard things. What about you? What about your desires?
Everything is affirmation driven,
right? And then when you do it, how could you ever?
I'm going to counter,
right? That's how the devil works.
I'm going to counter you, because I think you're bringing up a good point. I mean, I agree with you, but when I think about the many scenarios I've been either involved in or made aware of where somebody did not choose life, I am speaking from the benefit of having been fully informationally exhausted on the topic. By the time I had diagnoses in front of me, I don't know that it made it easy, but I had a lot of information and a lot of people with a culture of life behind me.
Right.
And I was married, and I had my faith formed to a point to where I could withstand it. Well, more easily. Anybody can withstand it. More easily could withstand it, even though it was the hardest thing, and it is the hardest thing. People are lied to. They are told by medical professionals, so they are meant to trust that the child will be in this immense pain. There is risk to you. This child will never da-da-da-da-da. So
Sure.
we are speaking, that is the Jesse Ridgway situation. He was just like, nah, we don't want to do this, man. Like, peace out. Like, I'm not doing this. This is hard.
And, Down syndrome, first of all, I've learned since having Herschel, there are a wide range of outcomes with Down syndrome. I just thought about it as the kids I knew with Down syndrome when I was in elementary school.
Right.
But there are low muscle tone. There's requiring G-tube feeds. There's a wide variety of outcomes that are very difficult. But there is a huge community of support. And all of the Down syndrome kids that I've met since becoming a father of Herschel are full of joy. They're denying not only that child of life, they're denying themselves of that experience in so many. And when I heard about the situation, I just thought about a lot of these kids that I know and I see regularly. And I just think, if they're not worthy of life, kind of going back to what you were saying, it's like, oh, this is difficult. Would you tell your other children, if things get difficult, just check out? Well, a lot of people would in today's culture. Oh, it's difficult. You have this euthanasia crisis happening in Canada.
That's right.
It's difficult. Let's just give up on it. And how was that, how was that the good thing? Do they even have a notion of what the good life is? And they don't. So I think it's scary that fear is leveraged and the enemy puts pressure on people to make this decision. And then after that decision, just like with abortion generally, after you make the decision, well, you're unforgivable. How could you, right? It's the same thing. So I want people to know that in the same way that Ani's saying, there's a lot of misinformation from ostensibly the professionals, the medical professionals that you should trust. I want to have that counter knowledge out there.
That's
that
right.
other perspective, which is it's not the end of the world. It's the end of the life that you thought it would be.
But it's like what you said, Nate, about someone needed to just be real with you.
Yes.
And like you also alluded to, yes, it's going to be hard.
Yeah.
Yes, there are going to be trade-offs. No, it's not going to be easy. No, life won't be the same. I think that's what people are craving. Because on one hand, you have the medical professionals saying, oh, they're not even going to blink and they're going to never smile. Like getting into all these details, which they could not possibly know.
And they don't know. That's the other thing. Not even to mention that a lot of times these diagnoses are false.
That's right.
You will prepare yourself with a prenatal diagnosis oftentimes for this life, and then you have a totally typical child.
But the other side of it, you have that doom and gloom from the medical community. But we don't want to give a false perception about difficulty.
No.
Because I did see a lot of comments specifically about Down syndrome to say, my child with Down syndrome, I knew my cousin, my sister, they're like the happiest person I've ever known. They're so happy. They're so happy. And I'm like, okay, pause.
Yeah.
Not every person with Down syndrome is that stereotypical.
That's right. That's
happy
and that's
effect.
important to remember.
And that is not why we are sparing this child of abortion, because they're going to grow up and smile a bunch.
Precisely.
And also, like worst case scenario, they're not going to live through birth, or they're going to have a few hours. Also just as worthy of life from, it's going to be great. You're going to love having a child with Down syndrome.
Sometimes.
Probably will.
But there's also going to be a lot of burden and difficulty that you don't see when you see the smiling, Down syndrome kid that you're hanging out with. Well, when they go home, their entire house setup is different and their entire lifestyle is different, that you don't see that either. And that's real.
And we're often not talking about certain commonly known diagnoses. A lot of times it's a rare anomaly with a very, very scary description. And it doesn't mean like some therapy and maybe a feeding tube. It means like parts of skulls missing, pain, seizures. Right. So I think we do have to be very, very attuned to the fact that this person is being told something scary, and we cannot brush it off with, well, every life's a gift and God doesn't make mistakes and it's going to be great, and they might be wrong.
Right.
Yeah.
Because they might be right.
A lot of people on
Well-
our side do this sort of naive advocacy. So I
Mhm.
wanted to encourage them who are on the correct side. That child is worthy of that dignified life insofar as we can support it naturally. But don't just look at the bright side.
Mhm. I
You
love that.
have to acknowledge the dark side.
That's right.
It is dark.
Mhm.
We have to, as a culture, accept that.
Right.
Because suffering's coming for you one way or the other. It's
That's
the one
right.
unavoidable thing in life. You may put it off for a little while, but it's gonna get you. I know a lot of people who are extremely wealthy, but their relationships are in shambles.
Mhm.
In some form, it's coming, and so that storm's coming. You can try to put it off. You're not going to. And part of life, part of the sanctification that we're meant to experience in this life, is learning to accept that suffering. Right? Christ said, pick up your cross and follow me. He
That's
didn't
right.
say, I'm going to make your life easy. You just follow me and everything's going to be, butterflies. He didn't say
That's
that.
right.
He said, one thing I promise you is difficulty. You will be persecuted for my name. All this difficulty is the life. Are you going to sign up for that?
That's right.
And yeah, you're supposed to.
That's right. And he said, if the world hates you,
Good.
keep in mind it hated me first.
Yes.
And that's another thing that it just breaks my heart about social media, because we feel like somebody clicking like is like an actual measurement of
No.
worth, and it's not.
It's usually a bot
Ratios.
anyway.
Yeah. Anya, final thoughts?
I want people to know that there are tangible resources, not just emotional and spiritual resources. Of course, you can reach out to CPC Metro area, and of course, reach out to local churches. Ask us what churches to reach out to that have
Yeah.
programs and
We know
have
the
trained
programs.
counselors. There's so much out there. So if you know someone yourself, or you know someone who is going through prenatal diagnosis or a potential prenatal diagnosis, whether it's life-limiting or it might just be something that comes and passes with a surgery, there are resources that are vetted, life-affirming organizations. I don't know, am I allowed to mention them?
Yeah.
Am I allowed to mention them? Okay. One we support is Able Speaks. They walk with families through a prenatal diagnosis, have grief retreats if there's a loss. They do a maternity shoot while the family's all together, so you can keep that, amongst many other things. There's Prenatal Partners for Life that walk through heavy diagnoses or loss and help you with funeral arrangements. There's Heaven's Gain, which walks through stillbirth, miscarriage, early loss, infant death. And there's Be Not Afraid, which refers to many vetted organizations. So I wish everybody knew that those exist, because a lot of times people are sent to someone who is in over their head because it's just such
That's
a
right.
difficult topic. And I want people to be able to talk to other people who have walked through that and can say, we can support you with the funeral. We can support you with a grief group. We can support you with the practicalities of going through a medical diagnosis.
Mhm.
And let's say you know someone that they have that child and they're in the throes of that life upside down initial phase. I encourage everybody to, first of all, reach out to us. We would love to talk with them and connect them to the resources, but having some of those resources known and identified so that when they're going through this crazy time, that you can put them into a peer group and recognize, there's a limit to what maybe I can do, but I can get them in front of somebody that can help.
That's
Because
right.
that's the biggest deal.
And final is that many people do abort because of a diagnosis. Many people who perhaps are listening to this know someone or are people who have experienced that. You are not excluded from post-abortion resources.
Mhm.
Healing is available to people who aborted for that reason too.
Right.
So I want people to walk away not feeling like, oh, here's Nate and Anja Baker, so good for them, convenient. They got their diagnosis when the baby was born, and they've made this righteous decision. No, it's all these blessings afforded to us at the time that we had the strength and we had each other. We want to wholeheartedly extend grace to people who did get lied to and did get manipulated and were afraid, and they need to be able to talk to someone.
Right. And that's why I'm so thankful that you did mention all of those different resources, because I think one accusation that people give the church is, well, when you can preach a big game, but when it comes down to these situations, you just don't say anything. It's crickets. I mean, that's what I hear all the time. But the church needs to be aware that no, we know of and we support and we are willing to hold your hand and walk you through the hardship. That's what we are here to do. Go and make disciples. Like use a horrible situation, a hard situation for the glory of God. And that's what I want to close with. I taught my 8-year-old a year or so ago. One of my favorite scripture verses is Romans 8:28. And when you were telling the story of DC, and that's what I'm trying to get everybody to understand. This is not the first time that I have referred to Anja as a pillar in the pro-life movement. You guys just don't know, but I'm glad that you told that story, because in the midst of what you were going through at the time, the nation changed, And I was thinking while you were telling that story, Romans 8:28 says, "And we know that in all things God works for the good of those who love him and who are called according to his purpose." It was not an easy thing to do for you to pack up what you had and just be obedient and say, I don't know what I'm going to say, but God, just use my voice. And look where we are. The overturn of Roe v. Wade was something that we were told for decades. I remember watching a TV show, and it was a comedy show, and I remember the comedian saying, abortion is not going to end in our lifetime. And where abortion itself hasn't ended, a lot of people thought that Roe v. Wade's overturn was just pie in the sky.
10 years ago.
And it's gone.
We thought unthinkable, and here we are many years after.
That's right. I know a wise person that I used to work with said God is always working upstream. And so we can look at each of our individual stories and see the hand of God weaving together something for our good and his glory. So guys, thank you so much for being here today. And I know that it was a blessing to me. It's a blessing to me to have you guys in my life. And so I just know that your message is going to be a blessing to everybody who hears. So with that, I hope everybody has a great rest of the week, and we will see you next time.